And so breaking news tonight, the long-awaited release of the new JFK files about an hour ago, posted on the National Archives website, are what the Trump administration says are tens of thousands of never-before-seen memos, some intelligence reports, troves of top-secret documents. We are talking more than 1,100 PDFs, and President Trump has promised full transparency, no redactions. And we've been sifting through so many of those pages after the DOJ lawyers have been working all night to do the same. One detail that has been debated for decades: the single bullet theory. That is the official account that one bullet caused a number of wounds in both JFK and the governor he was riding with, the path of that bullet, and doubts over who was responsible for firing this shot has fueled so many of the conspiracies we've heard over the years.
A single bullet caused 6 wounds while staying intact. But many argue that the bullet's trajectory is impossible. The angles just don't add up.
How, where, and when did the CIA surveil Lee Harvey Oswald?
My father was walking at the bottom of the hill with John McComb when I got home, who's the CIA director. My father said to him, "Did your people do this?" So his initial instinct was that the CIA had killed his brother.
That was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. there recounting his father's suspicions of U.S. government involvement in the JFK assassination back in 1963. Today, almost half of Americans have similar thoughts. One poll from a couple of years ago found that 43% believe the U.S. government was involved somehow. So, did today's document dump get us any closer to finding definitive answers? Let us hope so. So joining us now is Gerald Posner, who literally wrote the book about JFK and the assassination there. Gerald, thanks so much for being with us. 80,000 documents. I'm so sorry to ask you an hour after they're released, but have you been able to sort through and find any bombshells?
Yeah, no bombshells yet, but, you know, I hope springs eternal, because this is only 1,123 records. We expect another 30,000 to 35,000 pages tomorrow, and maybe they're holding the best material for the last bit, you know, doing a bit of drama. That would be perfect with the Trump administration spin.
Yeah, that would be definitely fit the MO at least. Does it look like the president rebuked the CIA here? Was there some internal fighting behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You just hit the nail on the head. The first time that when Trump was president, his inclination was to release them because, you know, he's been suspicious about the so-called deep state. And so you think he would say no to the CIA to withhold any of these files back. But he listened to Mike Pompeo, who was then the CIA director, who said, you can't release them because there's some sources, information, and some confidential material. That's one of the reasons I don't think you see Pompeo on Trump 2.0. So now Trump is ready to go. He wants the files out, and we're finally getting them. They should have been done. Biden could have released them as well. So, you know, I'm glad that they are out.
And now that they're out, I mean, do you have any predictions as to what we might see here? So,
I mean, my predictions, a lot of people, if you ask them on the street, what do you think you're going to find in the JFK files? They think they're going to find the second shooter of the assassination. They're going to find evidence of a CIA plot, that Oliver Stone is really more of a historian than we all think. I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think there's going to be material in here that will be embarrassing to the CIA. Information about how they had spied on Oswald when he visited Mexico City only 6 weeks before the president was murdered, and that they may have learned how unhinged he was in visits he made to the Cuban and Soviet missions. Then the question becomes, if they knew he was that unstable, why didn't they report that back to the FBI when he comes back into America only literally 5 weeks before Kennedy is killed? The FBI would have had him as a top priority, and maybe the assassination could have been prevented.
So just to clarify here, does it sound like, I mean, the big conspiracy, at least in your perspective, might be like a cover your ass kind of thing where, you know, the CIA may not have been forthcoming because they had him on the radar. They were watching him. They trailed him to Mexico and they didn't stop him. Is that accurate?
And that makes sense. This is the same thing that happened, as you know, at 9/11. The CIA and FBI don't talk to each other, and so the CIA had followed 2 terrorists into California, and they ended up on the planes that went into the towers. They never shared that information with the FBI or the FAA or anybody else. It's vintage CIA. because they developed their own sources of spying. So whatever they learned about Oswald at the Cuban and the Soviet missions in Mexico City would be a result of surveillance. Maybe they had video surveillance, they had audios, they had tapped telephones. They might have even had a human asset inside those missions was a double agent. They never want to tell that to the Warren Commission or share it with anybody else because they want to keep those assets in place. And as a result, they're always covering their own behind at the expense of the truth. That's unfortunate. Maybe these files will show us the extent to which that happens.
Okay, and again, this is your perspective. We don't know what's in these files. However, what you're saying here, when you do journalism for, like 20 years that I've been doing it now, like you find out a lot of times these grand conspiracies, what is behind the grand conspiracy is just somebody that didn't want to be caught looking stupid. This does seem like the root of many other modern day conspiracies, right?
No question about it. As a matter of fact, in the Kennedy assassination, even the FBI was guilty of it because Oswald himself had dropped off a note at the FBI Dallas headquarters telling an agent who was on the Oswald file, hey, lay off of me. Don't stop bothering my wife, Marina. I'm going to report you to the superiors. And we never seen that letter because the FBI agent destroyed it after the assassination and then later just testified to what the contents were. So, this is typical of what happens. Something terrible takes place, like Oswald's arrested for killing the president, and the FBI and the CIA, instead of immediately turning over everything they have, they start to look through the files and think, okay, what's going to be embarrassing? What should we hold back? And remember also, the CIA was not telling the Warren Commission that they were in a partnership with the mafia to try to kill a head of state, Fidel Castro. So that was all a secret that they kept as well. This type of cover-up has led to an erosion in public trust. No wonder. I think that Oswald alone killed Kennedy, but no wonder so many people disagree with me.
Yeah, that would be a very, very human explanation that I think a lot of people can just, relate to on a normal life, right? And yet I have it in my head, the single bullet theory. For me, and again, I'm not a physicist, but like the trajectories and there's a lot that you have to process for that bullet to actually kill Kennedy, embed itself in the governor after doing so much damage. And then there's the possibility that there was another bullet that was found there. You were saying that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in your mind. Like, how do you reconcile that? And is there any chance that we're going to see anything that sheds light on this in one way or another in all of these tens of thousands of documents?
I don't think we're going to see anything on the single bullet. And by the way, I'll tell you that the breakthrough on the single bullet actually came in the 90s by, not me, I reported on it only, by a firm called Failure Analysis that does courtroom reconstructions. They tested the bullet for both sides of the Kennedy case, that it was impossible to do it and that it was possible to do it. And they had new technology to apply ballistics that the Warren Commission and the FBI didn't even know didn't exist in the 1960s. When they test the bullet today, they can explain exactly why it goes through Kennedy and then wounds the Texas governor, ends up in very good condition afterwards because it slows as it goes through the two people. And it's not just a theory. They've recreated through two carcasses the same size as the president and the governor. They fire the bullet at the same distance from Oswald's type of gun, and they reproduce that bullet all day long. Now, that bullet, if it happened as I believe it did, the so-called single bullet, magic bullet, as Oliver Stone calls it, it doesn't tell you who killed Kennedy, doesn't tell you who was firing it from behind. Even if you conclude it's Oswald, as I do, you still don't know if it's a conspiracy. He could have been doing it for somebody else. And so it's a multi-layered case. The bullet is important. And if the single bullet couldn't have happened, you've got a conspiracy from the get-go. But even if the single bullet happened, you still have to do a lot more investigation to determine conspiracy or not.
Gerald, I'm so glad I talked to you before I stay up very late trying to go through all these documents. You have recalibrated my brain, and I really, really appreciate your insight today. Thank you.
I'm going to do an all-nighter. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk again about what we'll find later next week.
We'll be chatting soon.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.